Way back in 2008, our buddy Jeffrey Lord, writing in the Wall Street Journal, with respect to the Democrat Party, said there's a real missing history here that we don't talk about. Well, I want to tell you about some of that history, in addition to all that I've already conveyed. He says there's no reference to the number of Democratic Party platforms supporting slavery. There were 6, from 1940 through 1860. When we talk about Democrat history, there's no reference to the number of Democratic presidents who owned slaves. There were 7. There's no reference to the number of Democratic Party platforms that either supported segregation outright or were silent on the subject. There were 20, from 1868 through 1948. There's no reference to Jim Crow, as in Jim Crow laws, nor is there reference to the role Democrats played in creating them when we talk about Democrat history. There were the post-Civil War laws, passed enthusiastically by Democrats in that pesky 52-year part of the DNC's missing years. Their laws segregated public schools, public transportation, restaurants, restrooms, and public places in general, everything from water coolers to beaches. The reason Rosa Parks became famous is that she sat in the whites-only front section of a bus, the whites-only designation, the direct result of Democrats. There's no reference when we talk about Democrat history to the formation of the Ku Klux Klan, which, according to Columbia University historian Eric Foner, became a military force serving the interests of the Democrat Party, nor is there reference to the University of North Carolina historian Alan Treisleil's description of the Klan as the terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. There's no reference to the fact Democrats opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. The 13th banned slavery. The 14th effectively overturned the infamous 1857 Dred Scott decision made by Democratic pro-slavery Supreme Court justices by guaranteeing due process and equal protection to former slaves. And the 15th Amendment gave black Americans the right to vote. There's no reference in Democrat history to the fact that Democrats opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It was passed by the Republican Congress over the veto of President Andrew Johnson, who'd been a Democrat before joining Lincoln's ticket. The law was designed to provide blacks with the right to own private property, sign contracts, sue, and serve as witnesses in a legal proceeding. When we talk about Democrat history, there's no reference to the Democrats' opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1875. It was passed by a Republican Congress and signed into law by Ulysses S. Grant. The law prohibited racial discrimination in public places and public accommodations. There's no reference in Democrat history to the Democrats' 1904 platform, which devotes a section to, quote, sectional and racial agitation, claiming the GOP's protests against segregation and the denial of voting rights to blacks sought to, quote, revive the dead and hateful race and sectional animosities in any part of our common country, which in turn means confusion, distraction of business, and the reopening of wounds now happily healed. Well, he sounds like modern Democrats in that sense. There's no reference to 4 Democratic platforms from 1908 to 1920 that are silent on blacks, segregation, lynching, and voting rights as racial problems in the country mounted. The contrast to the GOP platforms of those years specifically addresses rights of the Negro, 1908, opposing lynching, 1912, 1920, 24, 28, and, as the New Deal kicks in, it speaks out about the dangers of making blacks wards of the state. There's no reference in Democrat history to the Democratic Convention of 1924, known to history as the Klan Bake, K-L-A-N Bake. The 103 ballot convention was held in Madison Square Garden. Hundreds of delegates were members of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan so powerful that a plank condemning Klan violence was defeated. There's no reference to the fact that it was Democrats who segregated the federal government at the direction of President Woodrow Wilson upon taking office in 1913. I can go on, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm not done. And I'm going to go on and on. I don't know why conservatives and Republicans are on the defense with this stuff. The Democrats are wrapped in the Confederate flag. They're wrapped in racism. They're wrapped in slavery and segregation and all the rest of the crap that goes with it. I'll be right back. You want to hear more? Well, I'm going to give you more. Because if I don't tell you, nobody's going to tell you. Trust me on this. The Democrat Party history. The Democrat Party, ladies and gentlemen, in many ways was a terrorist party. People think the Democrat Party began 50 years ago. It didn't begin 50 years ago. When we talk about Democrat history, there's reference to the fact that the Democrats created the Federal Reserve Board, passed labor and child welfare laws, created Social Security with Wilson's New Freedom and FDR's New Deal. There's no mention that these programs were created as the result of an agreement to ignore segregation and the lynching of blacks. Neither is there a reference to the thousands of local officials, state legislatures, state governors, U.S. congressmen and senators who were elected as supporters of slavery and then segregation between 1800 and 1965. Nor is there reference to the deal with the devil that left segregation and lynching as a way of life in return for the election and support of 3 post-Civil War Democrat presidents, Grover Cleveland, Woodrow Wilson, and Franklin Roosevelt. Now, these are the facts. There's no reference that the 3/4 of the opposition to the 1964 Civil Rights Bill in the U.S. House came from Democrats. 3/4. Or that 80% of the no votes in the Senate came from Democrats. Certainly there's no reference to the fact that the opposition induced future Democrat Senate leader Robert Byrd of West Virginia, not just a former Klansman, he formed his own local Klan in West Virginia, which had been part of the Union, not the Confederacy. And Tennessee Senator Albert Gore Sr., father of the future vice president. And there's no reference in Democrat history to the fact that Birmingham, Alabama, Public Safety Commissioner Bull Connor, who infamously unleashed dogs and fire hoses on civil rights protesters, was in fact, yes indeed, a member of both the Democratic National Committee and the Ku Klux Klan. It's the Democrats that have to clean up the Democrats, isn't it? The Republicans never did any of this. Official Republicans never did any of this. Republican senators never did any of this. Republican governors never did any of this. Republican mayors never did any of this. And Republicans have to answer for the Confederate flag. Democrats have to answer for the Democrat Party, as far as I'm concerned. But I've got more. Oh, I've been digging. President Lyndon Baines Johnson, often thought of as the great modern emancipator. Liberals will praise this guy left and right. He pushed the 64 Civil Rights Act. He pushed the 65. This man was a racist through and through. That's right, I said it. I want you to listen to this 1964 phone call. It's Johnson speaking. 1964, he's in the White House. He's on the White House phone. It's taped as they used to do in those days. I found it on YouTube. And I want you to listen carefully. This man came out of Texas. And he has to find ways to show that, you know, poll taxes and literacy texts and so forth and so on are discriminatory. He's lamenting this. Because he says, in fact, the ends, I won't use it like Obama does, the ends are voting in bigger numbers than the whites. So how can I prove it's discriminatory, he says. I want you to listen to this. Now, Rich, when you play it, kick up the volume. And, folks, if you want to hear it, you need to kick up the volume, too. I'm playing it, and hopefully the backbenchers will pick up on it. Cut one, go.
Say, well, you can't have a poll tax. They can say you can't have a gas tax or cigarette tax or anything else. And federal government's telling the states pretty tough what their business is. Now, you can say that they can't discriminate, but I've got to prove that it discriminates, and I can't prove it in Texas. There are more voting there than white folks.
Well, let's stop. There's more Ners voting there than the white folks. There's more Ners voting there than the white folks. I can't prove that these Jim Crow laws are preventing the Ners from voting. And it discriminates, but they want me to show it because there's more Ners voting than the white folks. So now we have two presidents who've used the N-word, Lyndon Johnson and Barack Obama, and they're both a disgrace. I don't care what your title is. I don't care what your race is. It's amazing. You don't have to ban words. Just have some self-control and don't use certain words. So start from the top, and we'll play it straight through. Cut 1, Lyndon Johnson, 1964 in the White House. Go.
Say, well, you can't have a poll tax. They can say you can't have a gas tax or cigarette tax or anything else.
Well, let's stop there. Pardon me. So he's comparing a poll tax to a cigarette tax or a gas. He's saying, the feds. Now, he's working for the Kennedys. He's saying, the feds, if they say you can't have a poll tax, I guess they can say you can't have a cigarette tax or a gas tax. What the hell's that all about? I mean, the Ners are voting more than the whites. What's the problem here? All right, start from the top. Go.
Say, well, you can't have a poll tax. They can say you can't have a gas tax or cigarette tax or anything else. And federal government's telling the states pretty tough what their business is. Now, you can say that they can't discriminate, but I've got to prove that it discriminates, and I can't prove it in Texas. There are more voting there than white folks. There are more buying poll taxes than white folks. Higher percentage of them. And I can't show that the literacy test is discriminate against because they haven't got any.
No, I can't show that it's a problem. Because there's no discrimination, really. The Ners are voting more than the white folks. But then there's Woodrow Wilson, turn of the last century. The first great progressive. Now, we have buildings named after Woodrow Wilson. We have institutes named after Woodrow Wilson. We've got entire departments in Ivy League schools named after Woodrow Wilson, the Woodrow Wilson this and the Wilson Boulevard and Woodrow. What a great man he was. Oh, the League of Nations, so forth and so on. Woodrow Wilson was a disgusting racist. Anybody takes the time to look at it, he was a disgusting racist. Scholar after scholar after scholar has written about this. A couple years back, professor at Boston University pointed this out. William Kaylor. Among other things, he wrote, born in Virginia and raised in Georgia and South Carolina. By the way, is this boring, everybody? I mean, I can talk about meatballs, or I can go on and on about what's the next statue we need to ban and who's good and who's bad. No. This is a history lesson. It's history time, baby. Real history. Born in Virginia and raised in Georgia and South Carolina, Woodrow Wilson was a loyal son of the Old South who regretted the outcome of the Civil War. He used his high office to reverse some of its consequences. When he entered the White House 100 years ago, Washington was rigidly a segregation town, except for the federal government, except for federal agencies. They had been integrated during the post-war Reconstruction period, enabling African Americans to obtain federal jobs and work side by side with whites in government agencies. While Wilson couldn't